Hello, welcome. We're
Hey.
the sort of return of a Grimstream of Perilous lore here. It was kind of at a soft reset a few weeks ago when friend of the network patron Adam Dagan and I talked about the Imperial Zoo. So I asked friend of the network and patron here, Bastion, to talk with me about a book, and he chose Archives of the Empire, Volume 1. So we're gonna kind of work our way through it, talk about it sort of like a review, give our thoughts on it. How could you use this book? What we think of it, and all that. So how are you doing today, Bastion?
I'm all good, my man, all good. Trying to save up all my money because fuel's going through the roof here, but other than that, everything's fantastic.
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't bought gas in like 2 weeks, so it's gonna be some sticker shock there.
Yeah, trust me.
Alrighty,
But
well,
other than that, England's great. We don't have COVID anymore. So the government says, so we're happy.
right? If we just don't acknowledge it, we're fine.
Yeah, ignore it and it will go away.
Exactly. Well, here we're gonna kind of ignore humans for the most part in the Warhammer setting, and this book. One of my favorite things about it is that it really focuses on non-human races. It talks about mostly about dwarves and elves and halflings. A lot on halflings, which is awesome. So I figured we'll just kind of move our way through it. We'll take a look at what's going on, and we'll tell you what we think as we go. So if you haven't
Wait a
gotten it,
minute.
what's that?
We'll interject. It's species now, Dan, not races. We call them species.
Good call. Yes, we should use the proper terms for it. The different species, non-human species we've got. So one part I don't want to say I'm going to skip. I'm going to mostly skip over the first chapter, all about the old world, the grand provinces. I
Mm.
covered this in a lot of depth in the first couple episodes of A Grim Stream of Perilous Lore, where I think it's episodes 2 and 3 are just the Empire, and I went through mostly using this book as the source. So we're gonna kind of skip over this, but it tells you the setup for what was going on in the year of the setting for fourth edition, which is 2512, which is quite different from the setting of second edition was 2522. In that case, it was right after the Storm of Chaos, but that got retconned to not really have happened. Kind of got turned into the end times with Warhammer Fantasy Battle. So I like that in fourth edition. They went back a little bit, just 10 years earlier, which makes some big changes. As I was reading through this, I was like, wait a minute, that's not who leads there. Not yet, at least. So this chapter is super helpful, especially if you're setting your game in the same time frame that the game kind of assumes it is. I know a lot of people play all different time of the Three Emperors, bringing back Storm of Chaos and playing then. I know, Bastion, you said you were in a game recently. Was it set at this time, or?
Yeah, it was Enemy Within time again. I think that's pretty much the default for most people, unless they've been playing for a long, long time, and then they can fool around with different time periods, like you alluded to, the Age of the Three Emperors and all those different good stuff. I mean, for me, I enjoyed a lot of the second edition lore that came
Mm,
out, especially I like it when they move the timeline along. But I also like in fourth edition where whilst they've gone back in time, they're setting up for the stuff that's happening in the future, which I particularly enjoyed. I know this isn't in this book, but Marius Leafdorf, as you get further along in the Enemy Within campaign, he pops up, and it's the first, other than like on wikis and fantasy battle, it's the first time I've come across him, and he's a character, definitely.
he's one of my favorites by a lot. So, when I was first reading through this book and I got to the part about Averland, and they didn't talk about Leetdorf being the Electric Count like he is in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, was very confused and a little upset because he's one of my favorites. I still have the model for him. Even I sold the rest of my Empire army after they killed Warhammer Fantasy. Sadly, I wish I had it now, but they didn't have him as the Electric Count, and I was very confused. And I realized it was. It took me a while to realize it was because the setting is a little bit before all of that, so he's just not the Electric Count yet.
What got me about him? I know this is a bit off topic, but it was figuring out how he was still alive, because everything that I read about him was he died at the Battle of at a battle of Blackfire Pass,
Right.
which the only ones that I knew of, not knowing a hell of a lot about the fantasy battle lore, was that there'd only been two, and the third one happens after 2512, but before the Storm of Chaos. Apparently, I'm still not 100% sure on when he dies.
Yeah.
But the fact that he's alive now is a good thing.
Well, it's one of those typical things with Warhammer lore that Warhammer Fantasy Battles says one thing's in the army book, it doesn't always match up with things that we see in the RPG books, and it's just we've kind of gotten used to it over the 30 plus years of the world that it doesn't line up, and it doesn't really have to. It's a fantasy world, like
There is no canon unless it's your canon.
right, exactly. So like, yeah, Elite Dwarf's appearances in the Empire Army book are usually about his death in that battle against an orc war boss, and then the Emperor like becoming like an avatar of Sigmar and avenging him. And then here we get a lot more about his character and everything. Not in this book again, but we're already off topic.
Anyway, so the first chapter, whilst it's got a lot of detail, and I don't think it treads any new ground that isn't already floated about out there. The significant places that they tag on at the end are a nice little touch. I particularly like, where is it? It's one of the southern provinces, where the significant place they've used is Kreutzhofen, which appears in the first edition Deathstalk Shadow campaign book. It was nice that that popped up, for me anyway. If you don't know what it is, then you probably just skip over it, but I enjoyed it.
I did like how they added little details like that, so it wasn't just rehashing things we already knew. It's also obviously really good for anybody new to the world of Warhammer, having this detail about the leaders of the different realms and everything, because the provinces are really important. Understanding the like attitudes of people that live in the different provinces, because like if you're experienced with it and you talk about an Ostlander versus a Sturlander, you just have an idea of what those people might be like and how they're different from each other, but new people will be like, I don't even know what those words mean. So having this information here is super helpful for that.
I think it's a GM resource to give you an idea of how to portray NPCs from different provinces, electoral provinces. It's good. For the details on the provinces, with everything being so centered about the Reekland at the minute, I think it's more of a tease than an actual. It's something you could develop if you wanted to, if you had some knowledge. But there's so much blank area there that's been covered previously that you could fill in future source books.
Right.
You could get bogged down trying to expand on that detail, and then another book come out a bit later, like Norland, for example. They're going to explore Slazenmund coming up in the future, hopefully this year sometime, and that's brand new. That's brand new territory, so that's very exciting to look forward to.
I know everybody's chomping at the bit for a Sturland source book, because then they have to include Sylvania. Everybody wants that.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to go that. I think they're going north and around the ways first, by the sounds of things.
Hopefully,
it's untouched territory, the north. From a publishing perspective, it's like Sylvania, Sturland. They've all been covered in Fantasy Battle or in second edition with Children of the Night and stuff like that. So it's a chance for Cubicle 7 to basically plant their own flag in the old world and say, right, this is ours, we've created this. But obviously that is, again, off topic. I did warn you I was feeling very tangential today.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. If they're going north, I would love to see a Marienburg source book, and more about that, being its own nation that's so close to the Empire. We know a fair bit about Marienburg and the Wastelands over the years, but like giving it an in-depth look with as a source book, I think would be. I think it would be awesome.
Sold Down the River, which was the first edition Marienburg source book, which is a really good city book, actually.
Okay.
Which came out with the Dying of the Light campaign, which was not so good. It has its moments, definitely, but it's a bit weird, that one. But the Marienburg source book from first edition, if they were to advance and build on that, that would be fantastic. I loved Marienburg decades ago when I first started playing. Especially Potent Square, which was a series of articles released in White Dwarf. It was it was that to me for the longest time more than Altdorf was what the old world was. But moving back to Rietdorf and the Moot, chapter 2.
Yeah, let's talk about halfling clans of the Empire.
See,
Ooh, went a little
now,
too
no,
far.
ordinarily, I don't really give halflings much of a second thought. But having come back and given the whole book a second read for this that we're doing, I've actually found that the two halfling chapters, the one on the clans and the one on the Moot itself, in fact, probably the best chapters out of the whole book for me.
So
Triggered a
good.
lot of interesting thoughts and inspiration. I mean, we were chatting before we started about how I've recently heard that halflings tend to have more teeth in their mouths than humans do. Just as an affectation, I think it is more than anything else. But then imagine
It's
this
canon
tiny little
now.
maniac running towards you with a meat cleaver and a maniacal grin and loads of teeth. It's been haunting my nightmares for a good couple of weeks.
I could see
And
that.
I've also been thinking about Chucky, the murderous doll.
Oh, no, thank
So
you.
you've got halfling with red hair, blue dungarees, and a butcher's knife. There's definitely an NPC in there somewhere.
Oh, yeah, that'll have to be added to the PCN NPCs list. But yeah, I love these two chapters. The second one especially, the Halfling Clans of the Reichland is great, just mostly as a source for inspiration for NPCs and or PCs that want to add more character to their character. Here, where you can decide to be a halfling of a particular clan, it tells you a lot about them, often the history of that clan, and then you can use that to inform your character play, which I think is awesome. So this book isn't. I like how it has a lot of GM stuff, but there's also player things sprinkled throughout that people can use.
It's definitely a fantastic resource for a player if they're going to play a non-human species. Utility-wise, I think, and it gives you insight into how to play a non-human species, because I think historically and even to this day, a lot of people will play non-humans as humans just with better stats, and understanding why a halfling is the way it is. It's not a thieving little person. It just doesn't consider other people's property to be their property. Everybody shares stuff, and so on and so forth. And it's being able to bring that into how you're role playing and understanding why in this section, why a particular clan is the way it is. I think, which is the one that the lower class halfling clan, is it the Glintfints or something like that? Skinflints?
Ooh, I don't remember. I'm gonna go back up to the contents and see what the different ones were, if that rings a bell.
The Skelfsiders. So they're like your lower class halflings, if you were. I mean, and then there's that section at the end where if you want to play a halfling with a particular clan, you can get these different talents or different skills, or just to personalize and represent. It's like the mechanics are helping you tell the story of your character. If you're going to be of a particular, well, what are they? Clans, aren't they? Yeah, clan. But then there's also makes clear to say that these aren't the only clans. So you're not bound by these. I think there's 12 clans in it.
Oh, I think so. Yep. Yeah, I like this is a sample, right? These are just examples of halfling clans out there. There's not saying that this is the definitive guide and that's all that you have to choose from. But it's nice that there's choices there. So, you can be a Brandy Snap and know about, actually have information about your family's history that you don't have to make up on the fly. Well, some people enjoy that part of it, but these I love these halfling names like Thorncobble and Rumster.
Oh, the name's amazing.
They do such a great job with this.
I'll try and remember them as we're going through, but there was one that had me absolutely howling. Where is it?
Oh, there are a couple really good ones.
Oh yeah, in the timeline, it was more of a pun than a name. Elder Leopold something or other establishes a ruling body. However, He is easily bought, so it becomes known as the paleo diet.
Oh yeah,
Paleo.
I was gonna absolutely mention that joke. I loved that joke because it was in one of the like timelines here
Yeah.
where he talks about the Pie War, and it goes through a couple different events. And he had the Paleo diet because of Emperor Leopold.
I think it was 712.
Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite jokes throughout
Oh,
this,
no,
and
it's 719.
and this book, this chapter, a guide to the Grand County of the Mootland, it might be my favorite chapter in the book. When I was first reading through it, I read through the character, the careers at the end first, and then I looked at the elf stuff because it was like, oh, we haven't really learned about the Lorelorn much before. And then I read Carrick Asgaraz, and then I was like, all right, I guess I'll read about the Moot. And it was like, why didn't I start with this? This is amazing stuff. It's so
I think
funny.
I did exactly the same thing. Went to the careers to see what the new stuff was. Oh, elves, love elves. Dwarves, yeah, when we get to dwarves, I'll give my opinion on dwarves. But coming back and reading it again, I'm thinking, why did I deny myself this? And I think out of all the chapters as well, it's got the most potential for mining for plot hooks and character ideas. We mentioned a couple before, the old dag with his blood sacrifice for his tobacco,
Oof.
and the guy who kidnaps tourists and works them to death on his farm. I'm just imagining like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but with halflings.
So,
Because go on,
you finish your thought there.
it's escaped now. It's
Oh,
gone.
I killed it. I'm sorry.
No. Oh, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, because everybody always thinks halfling probably dismisses them as like the comedy species.
Right.
But there's a massive inference that they are actually not. I mean, sinister's probably the wrong word to use. That's just how I'm spinning it at the moment. But especially when you come to reading about the field wardens and how dedicated and strong they are in defending the thing, you think, hang on a minute, these guys are like dwarves, especially when it comes to like mootish halflings and let's call them for the sake of argument imperial halflings who don't live in the moot.
Yeah.
It's similar to Carrick Dwarves and Imperial Dwarves, and they have tight family bonds, etc. So there's a lot going on there, and they do take a lot quite seriously, but then they have that sense of humour as well, which goes along with it, like snark hunts and basically conning daft people. It's just a brilliant chapter. That if you could buy it in pieces, that'd be the one I'd say definitely get.
Yeah, and it was a nice surprise. And I feel like this chapter, and what we've been talking about with halflings, and it getting more about them and how they live in the moot is just so like prime Warhammer to me, where it has that constant dread where the field wardens, they have to patrol their borders to make sure random skeletons and things don't just wander over from Sylvania. At the same time, they trick human tourists into selling them giant roosters all the time.
Uh-huh.
And they want people to come to the moot as tourists, which is just the idea of tourism in Warhammer to me is kind of hilarious to begin with. And then they just mess with them the whole time and like take their stuff because they don't have that understanding of property that humans do. And then they just try to swindle them the whole time, and they just basically make fun of them the whole time. Just that those two things together is so Warhammer to me.
With the comedy, the potential for the horror in there, it's probably the most Warhammer section I've read in a long time, to be honest, because it's got potential for every theme that Warhammer wants to hit on.
Exactly.
If you go back to the booklet that comes with the GM screen, and it says these are the themes. I think there's 5 of them that it lists, like class battles and things like that. It's all in there. It might be dressed up in a different way, but it's all in there, and it's I can't say enough good things about it.
Yeah. I'm going to say this a lot as we go through this book, but I feel like reading this chapter makes me want to run a campaign set just in the Mootland. We're not trying to save the world. There's not like something trying to destroy everything. It's more just trying to solve the everyday problems of other halflings, maybe with some combat with some different things marauding into the Mootland. But I think it could be... It's one I want to write for like a Patreon bonus show after we're done with Southlands, and just let people go haywire. You just do whatever you want role playing here, because there's all these different people. Like, it would be hundreds of NPCs kind of thing, and I feel like that would be a super fun game for the right group.
Definitely, you could make a brilliant comedy horror out of this, or just even you could take the most serious subject, but put it through the lens of halflings, and it becomes funny. It's still serious, but it's funny at the same time. And I think that's spot perfect example of the humor that Warhammer aims at.
Yes. So I guess that's something I'll be doing now. Once I started, I kind of finished writing the Southlands campaign. The PDF is available on the Patreon now, for like the first draft of it. Basically, want to get some feedback and improve it. I started writing a campaign set around playing all as wizards that are like, you start not quite graduating from apprentice, and then you become like a journeyman wizard, and like sent out basically on missions from the colleges as a group. Is one that
If
I'm
there's not an NPC in there called Barry Trotter, I'll be very disappointed.
like, I have to write that down. I guess there will be now. That one's still in really early stages of developing, but I'm having a lot of fun writing that as a campaign. That might be something we do in the future. But now, reading this book is like, well, now I want to stop that and write a moot campaign, because it could be so weird in that it would just be everyday stuff, like, the adventurers have to go over here to make a deal to buy this sheep for this person, and then you go back and they're rotting skeletons. What?
Or you got to go into an old farm and steal a secret recipe that's been buried under there, but it's fallen under, the scaven that they mention. Oh, sorry, skaven. While I'm on
I should have known. You throw it in there.
that they mention at the end of the chapter. They're not a huge threat in the moot, but they are using it as a through road to the north. I think it is, isn't it? Well, anyway, they're using it as a through road, so it's like an emerging threat. They could be stealing things or mixing warpstone into pies, and there's so, like you say, there's so much you could do.
Yeah, and I love this. As you go through, you see the story hook sections. They have a literal fish hook holding a slightly different hued box that gives you all kinds of ideas, and it's like, there's so much there to build off of. Oh my gosh, I love this chapter so much. And there's a nice map of the moot, which I feel like is more than I can remember ever seeing.
This casting my mind way back, I think this is the most in-depth treatment of the moot that's been officially published for Warhammer to date. And I can't speak to any Warhammer Fantasy Battle Army books that might have come out for them. I don't know if Halflings would have got. I know they had.
No, not that I can think of.
I know they had some units, but I don't think they ever got their own book, did they? So
No.
This is like, again, virgin territory for Cubicle 7, and they've definitely done it justice.
Yeah, I mean, if they can do, if this is what we get for new stuff for the moot, I can't wait for whatever else is coming. The other one you were talking, I can never remember the name of the place, the next city book that's coming out.
Flazemund.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about that place. I'm excited to read about it, because if this, just how much detail we got about the moot itself is so good. Like, here's your campaign map. You gotta go from here to there, do this and that. Like, I'll probably end up starting to write it later today or something stupid, but I'm excited. Super good. Love this chapter.
You've got your fingers in so many pies.
Oh, absolutely.
Pies. Anyway, moving on.
Too many. But yeah, so Halfling chapters, fantastic. Love it. Even if you didn't care much for Halflings before, you will after reading these chapters.
Yeah.
Oh, here's one of the road wardens with some of those scaven.
Oh, the other bit that I really like, I don't know if it's in this chapter or it's towards... No, it must be in this chapter. The Halfling sayings, where there's two lines of like polished. You roll 2d10s and match them up. So it's like Halfling says, "Oh, polish the badger" and stuff like that. I wanted to roll up a whole random list and just start dropping them in normal conversation just to see what people would do.
Right. I did appreciate how much innuendo they fit in here as well with the halflings, which I feel like isn't typical Cubicle 7 humor, but I appreciated it here.
Yeah. I mean, when it initially came out, I think I thought Cubicle 7 had leaned too hard into the humorous side of the setting and it wasn't really getting the pathos that I found from the first and second edition. But on going back and rereading them again, it's all still there. It's
Mm.
just the humor like jumped out at me first, so it was like my predominant thing. But in this section, it's front and center, but it doesn't feel out of place. And the other stuff, the serious bits, like how the politics of the moot as well. You wouldn't think halflings have got this political side to them, but they're very much, this is the moot. Humans are trying to do us over. We're just going to protect our own stuff. We've got our field wardens; they'll keep us safe. Badger riders riding over the hill and all the rest of it. We don't need you guys. You won't help us. We won't help you.
Right.
Um,
And just
so yeah, interesting.
one of my favorite things about the moot is supposed to be a joke in world. Like it was it Fat Ludwig the Fat declared the moot its own province as like an insult to another elector, and it was a joke to him.
Everland, I think it was.
Then they take it from Stirland.
It's a bit of both.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, Everland have kind of got to grips with it now. This is what it says in archives. Everlanders and Halflings kind of get along, but Stirland, being Stirland, are still bitter and resentful, but then they're grumpy sods anyway. But then when you're living next door to a county full of undead and vampires and stuff, you're not going to be the happiest soul in the world, are you?
Yeah, it makes sense that they're the more serious people of the Empire. But I just love that idea that the moot itself is a joke.
Yeah. Or because of what was it? I didn't put it in one of the other books. The services to culinary something, or service to Imperial culinary, they awarded them the moot or something along those lines.
Oh, right, that was his justification for it, I think.
Yeah,
Which
because he's fat and liked it.
I like Ludwig the Fat. All right, so that's enough, I think, waxing lyrical about the, I almost said Skaven chapters because the picture up is Skaven. About the Halfling chapters. We got chapter, I forgot what number we're on here, 4, I think, Imperial Dwarves. So we have 2 chapters about dwarves. We got Imperial Dwarves, and then look at Carrick Ranger. And this one, at first I skipped over this chapter initially, and then I went back to it when I did a TikTok series about this book. And I believe it's on the network TikTok. And I found it more interesting than I initially thought it was going to be. I love the idea that it goes into a lot of detail about typical dwarven settlements within human cities and how they set them up to be like almost like a Carrick, where they are super defensible and they have like their own wall around their dwarf town. Windows on the outside. Most of the buildings are underground. They have like collapsible spaces so they can retreat and then collapse areas if needed. Murder holes all over the place, which I just thought was super cool, that even in the cities that are already walled and are protected by human armies, they're like, no, we're going to take our own precautions.
Well, then that comes again from, was it Boris Gold Gatherer and the Emperor before him, who overtaxed dwarves because they got jealous of the wealth, so they decided that they were going to basically be able to defend their own property and wealth if it ever came down to that again. But because dwarves are so their alliance with the Empire has gone on for thousands and thousands of years, they won't abandon them completely and move out, but at the same time they're going to look after themselves if anybody ignores the decrees of that Magnus the Pious put in place, which is highly possible. I mean, for me, I've found, firstly, let me say, both sections, very well written, very interesting, but for me, dwarves are boring. I find them very one-dimensional, axes, beer, grudges, boom, dwarf, done. And these two chapters don't do much to change that. There's some great details in there, like all the different books that the elders hold, like the Book of Ancestors, the Book of Grudges, the Book of Debts, the different bits of language that they feed through it. So, like, this is what the word in Khazalid and stuff
Mm,
like that. Lots of interesting details, but it still doesn't make dwarves any more interesting for me personally. That's just my own personal opinion on it.
totally
It
fair.
doesn't. Is the bit that I did enjoy was the difference between Imperial and Carrick dwarves, because, like I
Hmm.
mentioned, for me, dwarves are troll slayers, engineers. That's all miners. But in
Or
If
just
Looks
basic
Could Kill,
warriors. That's
or
about it.
basic one, yeah. Now it does allude to the fact that Imperial dwarves are less tradition or hidebound than the Carrick dwarves, so they do take on more what dwarves would consider to be disreputable
Hmm.
careers, which are any of other than the ones I've just mentioned.
Pretty much,
But
yeah.
in If Looks Could Kill, the free adventure that Cubicle 7 released right at the very beginning,
It's a good
there's a
one.
dwarf charlatan in there. Now that was interesting. Then reflect back on Gottry from Mistaken Identity. He's not what you would consider to be a typical dwarf, but I don't think there's enough of those represented in the law or in the literature to really get my creative juices and imagination flowing with regards to dwarves. And this chapter is again just these dwarves do this and these dwarves do that, and they build under bridges, and again, interesting facts. But for me, it's my least favorite chapter in the book.
I find dwarves interesting in Warhammer because they're surprisingly polarizing. People tend to love dwarves or not really care. Sometimes dislike them as a species in the game. But I
Yeah,
find it interesting that dwarves are what's so polarizing. Like I feel like they're a little too Tolkien-esque, whereas halflings have been Warhammer halflings are obviously heavily inspired by hobbits. They're essentially hobbits, but they have enough to me to Warhammer halflings to separate them from hobbits. Whereas dwarves in Warhammer have always just seemed like Tolkien dwarves in the Warhammer world.
and I think this is my issue with dwarves in not just Warhammer, over any setting. Rarely, they all seem to just fall into that same stereotype. Now, yes, I know you can make your NPCs and your characters whatever they are,
Hmm.
whatever you want them to be. But I'm looking at it more from something to consume, to ignite that creative spark, to make me think, oh, well, I could have a dwarf who was this, for example. I think one of my favourite dwarven, if I have a favourite dwarf character ever, it'd be what's his name? Mackay McCallison from the Slayer books,
Yeah.
the Slayer engineer.
Oh, he's
Now
fantastic.
that's an interesting spin on a character for me. And again, the charlatan from If Looks Could Kill. That's an interesting spin on a dwarf. That shows you that dwarfs can be sneaky and dishonourable. I think there's also mention in the Imperial Dwarf section about after those two emperors basically rode roughshod of the dwarves' rights and stole the money. They It's one of the little grey side boxes. Dwarves went out and assassinated all their surviving kin and family.
Mm.
It's like revenge, and that to me seemed very un undwarf like, as I would expect it, behaviour. So if they did that, that was like a tick in the positive column for me. But again, it was only one. There wasn't a lot of that went on.
So even though it was a
Um,
horrible thing they did, it was a positive for you because it like broke the mold and they did something
yeah,
different.
exactly. It gave dwarves more dimensions for me. I mean, again, because I have this feeling about dwarves, I am I haven't delved into very far into the lore. I mean, I know there was a book, Stone and Steel, for first edition. I've still not read that to this day, just because I can't get into dwarves. So if I ever sit down and read it, or read more dwarf-based novels, I might change my opinion completely. And it's not a case of I wouldn't, I just haven't,
Hmm.
because there's so many other things that I know I like that I'll look at first. I'll get round to it one day, and I might come back on here and say, do you know what? I was completely wrong. Dwarves are amazing. It's not going to happen anytime soon, but it could happen.
It could. I
But
feel like
if you like dwarves, you'll love these chapters.
yes, I think that's a great. If you're already kind of into the anything dwarf, like my brother, he played dwarves in Warhammer Fantasy. Anytime we played WFRP, he was a dwarf. I will say, in defense of dwarves a little bit, I do love the idea of slayers. I do think that's super unique to Warhammer, and that's been stolen in a lot of other fantasy settings. I do want to make sure they get credit for that. I love slayers in the Warhammer world. The Imperial Dwarf chapter is just another. It's good if you want to expand on your dwarf character or dwarf NPCs. But I think the Carrick Asgaraz chapter, A Guide to Carrick Asgaraz, is really where the dwarf content shines in this book. Because as usual, I assume this place, I'm sure it's been mentioned before, but I haven't ever seen more detail about it. I think what Cubicle 7 did here was nice, except I wish there was any kind of map or images other than the entranceway here. I really love a map of Carrick Asgaraz or more detail about the surroundings. Yeah, I think that I feel like that's clearly missing because we have this sweet map of the Moot. We get a really nice map of the Laurel Lorn, and we get one image here of the entryway to Carrick Asgaraz.
There is a map in that section, because it's got like the Mound of Krell. Because that's one of the things I love about Warhammer maps is all the little bits that they put on there that that they don't ever talk about. They just put it there.
Right.
You have to make up your own stories about it.
What am I?
Where's that map?
Oh yeah, they zoom in on the map of the Reichland. But it's the same thing you have like on the inside cover of the rulebook. So like we see to show us where Carrick Asgaraz is in relation to things, like it's southwest of Ubersreich. But I would love to have a map of Carrick Asgaraz itself, you know, the different levels and whatnot, and that way, because I feel like it was missing here because Carrick, it's a great start to like building your own Carrick. Especially, like, again, you could make a whole campaign set as playing as dwarves that all live in the same Carrick that do things in and around the Carrick. And I felt like having a map of this place that could be like a generic Carrick that you could place anywhere, I feel like would have been would have been perfect. What's that?
Did you have Plundered Vaults for 2nd edition?
I do, yeah.
That's got, I mean, I know it's abandoned, but that's got a map of an old Carrick, and it's in the World's Edge Mountains, but you could use, again, I know there isn't an official one, but you could use that to rip off it. I think it's got about 9 odd levels on it.
Is that Plundered Vaults, or what was that? Is that Carrick Asgal?
Yes.
Is the one?
Carrick Asgal, yeah.
I think that's the one 2nd edition book I don't have, because back in the day my brother had that. He bought that book because he was super into dwarves, and you know I was in college when that game was being released, so it was like, well, I don't have any money for this, so I guess I'll just look at his. And now he lives a few hours away and it's his book, so he has it, and I don't. It's like the one I don't have, that and the Thousand Thrones. Only once.
I pull it out of my pile, but it's like really near the bottom. The pile's about 1 meter high, so. But that's got a good map.
That was a cool book that was like a big dungeon delve for Warhammer, which was kind of neat.
But I know what you mean. But then apart from that one, I can't think of any dwarf maps again. Apart from Carrick Asgal.
No.
You know, like with the Moot and stuff. I think because Warhammer's so human centric that this book, Archives of Empire, is probably the biggest treatment, apart from one of the Warhammer companions in 1st edition, that the other species have ever got.
Yeah. I remember 2nd edition, that was what people were asking for all the time. They wanted an elf source book and they wanted a dwarf source book, and we never got it outside of Carrick Asgal a little bit, which was more of an adventure book than a source book.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is this kind of gives us that truncated a bit. I would, they could not easily, but they could certainly do a whole halfling source book, a whole dwarf source book, a whole elf source book, for
Oh,
sure.
easy. Yeah, yeah. If
And it would sell like crazy. I think everybody would get that. I think that's people have wanted that forever because, like, yeah, we know humans. Like, we got this stuff for humans down. I love that their city books, I think, add a ton because that can fit any of the different species. But like, give me a generic Carrick map that I can use in whatever. Like, I think
yeah,
that's needed.
or the a layout of an elven city,
Yes.
or but not city as in like Wolfman type city, a Lorelorn city, or a Atholloran, a tree, basically a tree city.
That'd be super cool.
I'd love to see what that's envisioned like in a Warhammer way. I mean, when we get to the Elf chapter in a few minutes, they do again when they're describing it. They allude to like the center is old ruins,
Mm.
which is where all the nobles and everything live. Then as you move out in like concentric circles, the next lot is tree houses, and then as it moves further out to where the newer refugee lower class, as the elves class live, are basically elf slums. Um, but again, there's that really broad and fast description, but no map or even a picture to kind of give you an idea of what that could look like.
I like that a lot. So why don't we just jump into the elf chapter, a
Yeah,
guide to the Lorelorn, which I like this one a lot. I lean more toward the elf side than the dwarf side. I played high elves. I still have a high elf army for Warhammer Fantasy, and partly because my brother was so into dwarves, I was like, well, he's my younger brother. I have to get the race that's
got to
better
the
than
answer.
his. I need to get the species that's better than his, so I'm going to get high elves. And this is...
The dwarves beat the dwarves beat the high elves in War of Beard.
I don't understand what you're saying right now. I don't speak Spanish.
Okay.
But I like this one because it gave more life to elves that live within the boundaries of the Empire. And it gave us an idea of elves that aren't wood elves from Atholloran. They're not high elves either. I like the idea of the elves from the Lorelorn that are essentially... Some of them are old enough to have been from that time, but most of them are like ancestors of high elves that settled here in the Empire and stayed behind when the rest left during the War of the Beard.
Almost like American.
A little bit. You're not wrong.
I think one of the thing again, what a lot, all the chapters have said, right, the ones in this book are this way. So like Imperial Dwarves are like this, and Carrick Dwarves are like this, Mootish Halflings are like this, Imperial Halflings are like this. And with Elves, they've got almost 4 different things. They've got the Druchai, Arazai, Azure, and Aeonir.
Mm.
And the Aeonir are the closest, not closest to human, but work closest with humans than any of the other 3, probably apart from probably the Azure. But they're your typical highfalutin, arrogant type elf. Whereas
Right.
the Aeonir are more, I wouldn't say grounded because they've still got that elvish quality, elvish superior quality about them, but they're more have probably more of a realistic worldview because they've had to like fight and defend for themselves and protect their territory, even against the other elves
Mm.
when they claimed independence from the Phoenix King. What I did find interesting in this chapter that they make mention to is that they sent an ambassador to the Dark Elves because they felt that they had a similarity with the Dark Elves because the Dark Elves were also pushed away from the main Azure caste species, subspecies, however it was, society. I don't. It doesn't say how that ended up, but it doesn't say that it ended well. So I can only assume it went badly.
It's Warhammer, so I think that's safe to assume.
Yeah, it's fair to assume it went badly. So yeah, it's But I think reading through it, there was a lot of like the Wood Elves from Athol Lauren are like this, the Aeonia aren't. The Azure are like this, the Aeonia aren't. So rather than saying what they are, it kind of shows what they're not by what the other elves were, because the other elves are probably more well known. Obviously, you've got your high elf armies, your Athol Lauren dryads and Orion and giant stomping tree men and things like that from Fantasy Battle.
Yeah.
Whereas this lot in the Lorelorn, they've been there, but they've never really been highlighted before.
And
So I think,
I like how they added more detail here with the classes within their own society here with the different kindreds, the city-born, the forest-born, and the younger kindred. I think, again, if you're playing an elf character, you want to be from the Lorelorn, here's a bunch more choices to help, you know, guide your character. Love the idea of I think it's the Harioth, the younger kindred, that are like immigrants basically to this area. They were
yeah,
arrived after the War of the Beard, which in imperial terms was what 3,000 years ago or something,
3,000 odd years, yeah.
way before the empire was even established. And it's like, oh, you've only been here
You mean,
2,000 years, like you're go home. It's
yeah, you stay on
ridiculous.
the outgoing. But I also like how they say they've got this rigid caste system and they shouldn't mix, but then they also give give you an in for a mixed party because then you have the kith bands.
Yeah.
So a city born who is in a certain career or has a certain interest will mix with a forest born who shares that same interest, because then they become a kith band. But it's very clear to say that just because those two people get on doesn't mean that that city born will then get on with any other forest born. And it's those descriptions of how an elf would act that I think is needed to help people accurately portray the non-human species in this game and any game, so that you're not just playing a human with pointy ears, you're playing an elf. Now, this has got nothing necessarily to do with this book, but one thing that bothers me about elves and dwarves to a lesser extent is, like you just alluded to, there can be thousands of years old. They're generally accepted to be centuries old, and yet they're coming into this is a mechanic issue, coming into a game with not really any better experience than a 16-year-old human. Yes, the stats are a bit higher, which
Yeah.
influences the skills, but that that's to me is a effect of their race, not the fact that they've lived for so long. I mean, I don't know how you'd work around that from a balancing issue. It's just it always seems to be glossed over for me, and I think it should be addressed at some point.
Yeah, that's a good question. How would you balance that? Like, how do you have this person that's hundreds, if not over 1,000 years old, in the same party as a 16-year-old blacksmith apprentice, and have
Yeah,
it not obvious that the one character is just objectively better? I mean,
yeah,
chances are the elf character will have higher stats, but like you said, like that doesn't necessarily. They're not going to make every roll they make anyway. They can have all. I've seen characters with agility in the 80s and constantly fail hide checks and tumbling check and all that kind of stuff just because of rolls. So like, how do you balance that? I don't know.
no, that's a question for the superior game designers out there. But I just think it's like you could, like that example you just made is perfect. You've got a 220-year-old elf blacksmith who's been blacksmithing for hundreds of years, and a 16-year-old blacksmith who could essentially have exactly the same stat.
Yeah.
And again, it's more of a mechanics issue than a story issue, and you can hand wave it as much as you want to. I just think the mechanics of Warhammer for me help with the storytelling. I don't think you could run Warhammer without the mechanics as presented. So there should be something in there to address it, in my opinion. That's what's missing from the Elf chapter for me, explaining how this 200-year-old can come out and not know so much about the world, and not, yes, they're isolationists and stuff, but they still should have superlative knowledge on herbalism or forestry or those kind of things. I mean, you read the description of the Ghost Rider that we'll come to when we get to the career section, and the write up of them, the fluff makes them sound like they're some kind of like hand ninja or Wolverine or something like that. But then
Right.
you look at the skills and the advanced scheme, and you think, well, you're a gamekeeper. That's it. It's just a thing. I think it's not something that I think you can fix in a game like this, because you've got to, even though there isn't necessarily the same sense of balance in Warhammer as there is in, say, Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. There's still got to be a nod to balance. So you've not
Right.
got one party member constantly outshining another, unless it's a Bruno Mina situation where the players play for that. But
Yes.
yeah, I just think. I mean, I'm casting my mind back again to there was a huge article in one of the first edition companions where they had war dancers. Now they're interesting. I was disappointed war dancers weren't in here, because that would have been epic. And elves apparently have this thing, because elves don't need to sleep. They only need to sleep every 3 days. And when they sleep, they have a special technique called Brandwashan. And I've pronounced that like it's written in the book, but obviously it's a thing of brainwashing, where they can selectively forget
What?
facts that they don't consider to be important, so that they basically don't fill the brain up. The idea being that they've lived for all these hundreds of years. Eventually, there's going to be so much stuff in the brain, they're not going to be able to remember stuff. And I think one of the examples is that you could meet an elf one day, meet him again the second day, and him genuinely have absolutely no idea who you are, because he didn't think you were important enough to remember, and you've just gone straight out of his head.
Huh. I've never read about that before. That's awesome.
I'll find which book it was reprinted from a White Dwarf article into one of the. It's not one of the Apocrypha books. It's I'll find it and I'll tell you later.
Very cool.
But yeah, it's the first edition book, and that, if they'd have took some of that material and put it in here,
Yeah.
it would have really enhanced the section. Again, great section, loads of detail, loads of ideas, but it could have been enhanced with some of the older material to explain away why these elves aren't, running around with 8 laws of magic as soon as they come into the game. How is, again, you've got a 200-year-old apprentice wizard. Come on, really? But that's my thoughts.
I like that. I feel like you kind of explained it. I agree that's something that having that in this book would have made a lot more sense, but maybe we'll get a more expanded elf source book down the line. I know that we're getting near the end of things that Cubicle 7 has told us are coming down the pipe. With Up in Arms, we should be getting hopefully in a week or two. And the magic book, the name of it escapes me.
I can't remember. But yeah, there's the magic book, there's the Slasman book, there's the Up in Arms. I think there's another.
There's not much after that we know about, right?
Yeah, I can't, because I think everything else was like the PDFs, like the Adventures in the Old World, like the little PDFs they released. I think they were the other ones that they mentioned. The last production update that I read that was mentioned.
We need more.
Need more. I do know that they're working on their own new campaign. But
Ooh.
Only that they're working on it, not that there's I don't know any details.
Oh, because I thought last they announced officially was that they weren't, after the Enemy Within was done, they were done with big multi-book campaigns, and they were gonna still have old world adventures and adventures in Ubersreich.
Ubersreich, they're all one shots but linked together.
Yeah.
In that you can link them together if you want, or you can play them all as their own individual adventures. I think that's going to be their format.
Which I'm totally fine with.
Yeah, rather than 6-month Kaizo adventure paths, you could play each month's section as its own individual thing. Well, maybe not so much with Paizo, but with Ghostfire, who have just started a Fable line. They're doing six parts once a month. Each one is a single adventure, but with a section that links it to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And I think that's the way that Cubicle 7 will probably go.
Sounds good to me. I'll take it.
So and then hopefully they'll release them all in a book like they did with the first Uber's Reich adventures. After all 6 were out, they released the hard copy book. They've done it again with the second one. If they keep on with that format, I'll be a very happy fan.
Right? Yeah. I mean, we'll be playing The Enemy Within for the next probably 5 years at the rate that we're going for a Grim Podcast of Perilous Adventure, but we're always looking for stuff for bonus.
I'll put Death on the Reap quite fast, to be honest.
We're not done yet. Oh, we just got raided. Hello, everybody. Thanks, Throwlash. So I think that'll bring us to the second to last part here, which is what most people looked at first in this book, Appendix 1, the careers. Because once people heard that there was going to be a Badger Rider, that's all anybody cared about. So the first one is Ghost Rider, which is specific for Wood Elf. So if you happen to roll like that 100 on the species roll, I think is Wood Elf, either 99 or 100, one of those. Or, I didn't realize till we were making characters for our Feast of Blood bonus game for getting reviews on Gapapa. It's only 20 experience that you give up for choosing your species.
Yeah, but that's a lot of experience at the very beginning.
It's only 2 advances. Like, I didn't realize it was that much. I thought it was a lot more for some reason. But yeah, the Ghost Rider, I guess if you want a better scout, because I think this one's so each of these has a if you roll this, you can switch it out for this career instead. So if you roll Scout or Soldier as a Wood Elf, you can switch it out for Ghost Rider, which I'm not really sure how it's different than Scout, other than it gets a lot of, like, I can make my own bow rules. Yeah. Like, they get Trade Boyer.
That's a big thing, didn't it?
Other than that, I'm sure it has slightly different skills and slightly different advances for the characteristics, but I didn't look at that closely. It's just like, okay, it's another Wood Elf hiding in the woods career. Did we read another one?
About the careers when they write them up. I think if you go to the 4th level, his trappings, it says something like his trapping is a fearsome reputation or something like that.
Yeah, this is his last one.
I love it when they put stuff like that in there.
The trappings are usually pretty fantastic, especially higher level ones where they typically get ridiculous. After that, we have the Field Warden. If you're a Halfling and you roll Scout or Soldier, you can switch it out for Field Warden, which I think is a little more justified as its own career here, which is just kind of cool. And I like how we eventually get to Field Warden Captain is the 4th level. And again, garrison of experienced Field Wardens and respect of the community as trappings. Yeah. So, like, this fits super well. Obviously, I feel like if you're going to do a campaign in the Moot, you almost, not have to, but it would make things make a lot of sense if one of the characters was a Field Warden and, like, you were working under a Field Warden captain or something like that. I like the inclusion of this. Halflings need more Halfling-specific ones. I like this one well enough. It's a good, more combat-focused class just for Halflings, but focused on range. Because they get ballistic skill advance in the beginning, they get range sling at the 1st level, and I think they get some cool talents, like accurate shot in the 2nd level. Just spend a bunch of experience on accurate shot and you will be doing tons of damage with that sling.
Yeah, I think that's probably that career to me speaks more to the being a specific species. I'm filling that gap. You throw slings at slings at undead and stuff like that, and that career is built to that with the skills, whereas the Ghost Rider, the Ghost Rider is just, again, like you said, he can make his own bow and arrows. That's the only difference I see to him as a bog standard targeteer.
Yeah.
he's got his stealthiness in there, but I mean, I know, as we've established, I'm loving halflings at the moment.
Yeah, for
So
real. I kind of want to make a field warden now.
they can do no wrong in my eyes.
I do love at the third level of it, field warden sergeant, they get lore necromancy. I just now I accidentally read that as like
They can cast them.
yeah, I read it as like magic necromancy, and I was like, what? Oh, like just know about it. And then later they get hatred, undead, and fearless, like super cool. Needed
And I
for
think
halflings.
it's those talents that make, because you think, if again, to use a comparison with 5th edition and Pathfinder, if this was a ranger, he'd have favored enemy undead,
Yeah,
whereas instead they make them fearless. So that's a big issue in Warhammer, because conditions are so, can't think of the word, detrimental to playing your character, that being fearless in the face of undead is huge,
pretty brutal.
and that hatred gives you that extra damage. So they're almost your bonus, if you like, for being so specific on fighting undead. So I like that touch. I like how they've built that in there into that career, made it. They're still well rounded, but they've got that specificity towards undead in there as well.
I like it a lot. I like these careers. It's interesting too that they're all martial careers. They all switch out from like scout or soldier. The next one we have, the Carrick Ranger, is dwarf specific, and again, if you roll scout or soldier, you can switch out for Carrick Ranger. And this one, I like this one as a dwarf career. It's something that was like dwarf rangers are pretty classic Warhammer unit, like literally Warhammer Fantasy Battle on the table, and it's just something that dwarves have always been known for in the Warhammer world. They have to go out, ranging among their mountains to make sure things are safe, take out any wayward greenskins and whatnot. So I like the inclusion of this career, and I think
for me, outside of World of Warcraft, I've never really considered dwarf rangers until this. So for me, this was a nice addition.
okay, well, it's either
It's like you said, you know more about dwarves than I do, obviously, but I'd never considered dwarf rangers. So that's another tick for the variety of dwarves. I've learned something today. I feel like I've grown as a person.
that's what the PCN is all about, helping people grow as people.
People grow.
But I like this one that it gives a dwarf. You can still be like a melee fighter here, but have some additional things, so you're not just hitting things and taking hits. Their income skill is trade cartographer, which is really cool. It's kind of like the explorer career from 2nd edition, but just for dwarves here, where they can get a lot of cool stuff like orientation at first level, strider any, so you can be good at passing over any kind of terrain you want. Later on, they get range black powder. I love this. The image here shows a Carrick Ranger. She's got a sweet axe. It looks like a big old blunderbuss on her back.
I don't know how wise it'd be firing off a blunderbuss or a black powder weapon in the mountains, though, where there's danger of avalanche. But that's just me being practical.
It does seem a little out of place, but I mean, it's dwarf. I guess they have to get range black powder.
Yeah.
Let's see. They can get things like gunner, stealth, underground is a cool one. Let's see, what are their cool trappings? 4 apprentice hold runners. That's the first level of the career. Maps and souvenirs from many travels. So this one's like, it's neat, it's cool, I like it. It doesn't stand out as much as the last one though, which is everybody's favorite, the Halfling Badger Rider, which you can switch out if you roll a Halfling Soldier. You can switch out for Badger Rider, which is just what it sounds like. They're a Halfling cavalry that rides badgers.
I have to interject here, Mr. Cole. I think if you go back up to the top, to be allowed to play a Badger Rider, you have to convince your GM that they exist, because a lot of people believe they are mythical, and I think you also then have to make some kind of funny noise. So it's not just a roll on the table and swapping it out.
That's true. I'm glad you pointed that out. I forgot that bit. Yeah, in addition, they must attempt to replicate the badger's terrifying war cry for the benefit of their fellow players. I love this career so much because it's so goofy. I mean, you look at it, it's stupid, but in the best way. Like, this goofy looking halfling who's missing teeth, wielding a meat cleaver, who's just riding on this badger that looks like it has no business with something on its back.
It's so ridiculous and yet so serious at the same time. It does some damage. It's got some skills and some talents in there.
It's a really good combat career.
You'd imagine it coming towards you and you'd be like, what the hell is that? And then boom, it's on you.
Right?
Like, I think the text in here, it's about an ogre that's picking on some people, and this badger rider rocks up, says his badger up his trousers, and the ogre's like, done, that's it, game over. And you just think, again, daft, but juxtaposed with this serious situation. And yeah, again, I know I've waxed over halflings so much today, but again, this is just another brilliant thing for me.
Everybody loves the Badger Rider, and it's all of it's ridiculous, except the one glaring omission that Cubicle 7 just seems to pretend is not a problem, where one of your trappings is a tamed badger with saddle and tack, but in no book have they released stats for a badger.
Doesn't it say it's the equivalent to something? Or have I imagined? I might have imagined.
I feel like people have just kind of decided over the time that's whatever, just count it as a wolf or something like that. So for the PCN NPCs and monsters we release on every other Wednesday, the badger, the tamed badger to ride will be coming very soon. Absolutely. I'm gonna write up the monster stats for an average sized badger that these halflings have. What's the word I'm looking for? Bred to be large enough for the halflings to ride as cavalry, and then people can use that if they're a patron and get the stats for that. That'll be coming in a couple of weeks. I think next up is a Pathfinder NPC first. But yeah, the Badger Rider is amazing. It's interesting that it's actually more of a ranged combat class than a melee combat class, because they get ranged sling, they get ballistic skill advances in the first level, they get marksman as a possible talent, fast shot, and then later on they get melee basic in the second level, but then they also get accurate shot, which is super good.
Ridings, like trick riding and stuff early on.
They do get Rough Rider right away. In the first level, they can get. Do they get Trick Rider? Trick Riding's in the third level. Badger Sergeant. And one of the trappings for Badger Sergeant is Badger Barding, where they get 2 AP on their head and torso, which is fantastic. Let's see, Badger Master is the last level. This is always some of the best stuff. They get Carouser, Frightening as possible talents, and Inspiring. Love it. The trappings are a large tame badger, also known as... Right? Oh, I guess I do. Also known as a Mootland Spotted Pony Badger, a Squire...
No, that's what I'd read. Mooted Potters, yeah. I thought that was used those stats, but that doesn't exist. So there you go, job for you.
Oh, okay. So that's what I guess I'll have 2 different stat blocks there. Plate armor, which is hilarious to think of a halfling in plate armor, and a sense of humor.
You'll just be wearing pots and pans, mate. That's halfling plate armor.
You're right. It's literal just ceramic plates.
Yeah.
But I love sense of humor.
There you go. That's all you need. Because if you're going to call yourself a badger botherer, then you definitely need a sense of humor anyway.
Oh man, I love.
That's the first one, isn't it? The squire type squire level.
Yeah, Badger Botherer.
Badger botherer.
I love some of the different names of the levels of careers here throughout this game. Some of them are really good. But those are the new careers. They're great. Can't wait to have a Badger. Badger Rider is kind of... Now that I've had a campaign where a player has been a rat catcher, that's always been like a dream. I want somebody to play a rat catcher. And then we have Liliana with that in Settling the Southlands. I need somebody to play a Badger Rider or do it myself at some point with some bonus stuff.
Tim missed a trick in the recent 55-star review, Feast of Blood. He's playing a halfling, isn't he? He should have been a Badger Rider.
Oh, yeah. He used the pre-generated peddler because he didn't make a character in time. And then just changed the name. Randall Bottom Dollar. But the very last thing in the book here, Appendix 2, are some new weapons, which are these species-specific weapons. We have some the new elf ones, the Eonir Warblade, Spear, or Wildwood Sword, which is, I like this just to add some variety. Even, it's like, oh, well, I'll count it as a Eonir Spear and have it on this monster kind of thing. Some dwarf new weapons. I love that they had added the Slayer's Axe as its own separate weapon, which gives it strength. It's a two-handed weapon, right?
Impact.
Yes. Yeah, well, impact, damaging, and plus 6 damage. It's a better Warhammer. But also the Bearded Axe and a Dwarf Hammer, which is just a hand weapon with the pummel ability, which is cool. And then they added a couple of Halfling weapons, Nan's Cleaver, which is what the Badger Rider has there, and an Iron Skillet, which has the defensive quality.
What I'm talking about.
Fantastic.
2 AP to head with a colander on there. Job done.
Right. We got a bunch of new range weapons like Dwarf Handgun, Dwarf Pistol, Dwarf Crossbow that are just better than the human counterparts. I love the Cinder Blast Bomb is cool. Yonir, we have Blackbriar Javelin, which is just, okay, cool. It can be poisoned.
You plant it in the ground and it gains a poison. You can issue a poison condition, can't you?
Yeah, if you allow it to rest in fertile earth each night, then it inflicts 1 poison condition on any target that takes a wound from it, which is pretty sweet. And then some extra weapon ammunition like Drakefire Shot, Precision Shot and Powder. What do we got? Starfire Shafts and Swift Shiver Shafts for elf bows. Some nasty stuff.
More qualities you've got to remember when you're chucking up your
right.
success.
Right. So I'm not going to go through all the stats of all those weapons, but it just more options for non-human characters. Fantastic. I love it. I love this book a lot. I think it's super useful if you are like homebrewing a campaign or just want to add more detail to your campaign. Maybe not so useful if you're running the enemy within. I feel like it's not fantastic for that. You could grab things for NPCs.
If you were a player and you were playing a non-human species, and you had the money, definitely pick it up.
Yes.
A bit more to your character. But from a GM perspective, like you say, Dan, I think it's niche in that respect. It's for your own stuff. It doesn't marry up to the enemy within in any regard, really, does it? I don't think. Even moving past Death on the Reich, I can't think of.
Not really. Which I think.
Apart from Horned Rat, probably.
Maybe a little bit, yeah. But I like that about this book. Not every, 4th edition has really, really heavily leaned on the enemy within as the backbone of everything. And having things like Archives Volumes 1 and 2 to not really coincide with it at all, I think is totally fine and necessary. So it's not like 4th edition is the enemy within. Like, you can do other stuff too. And these books really flesh that out. Just the inspiration from the lore sections of this book, I think, are super beneficial to GMs if they want to run something other than Enemy Within. And like you said, tons of player options in this as well. I mean, 4 careers is by far the most we get in a book outside the core book. There's 1 career here and there, and other. I think Archives Volume 2 has 3 careers, but they're all ogre specific, which we could talk about that again another day because Archives Volume 2 is also fantastic.
It's a lot more rules focused than fluff focused.
Yes,
well, Archives, isn't it?
For sure.
But I think for GMs, I don't think there's a page in Archives of Empire Volume 1 where there isn't at least a seed of something that you could grow into an adventure or a character. Every page has got something, even if it's just a line or a nod to something. It's good. You can mine it for a lot of stuff.
Absolutely.
But keep in mind, it is all non-human. Obviously, you can involve humans, but to get the most value for money, you want to be making, like Dan says, halfling campaigns, patrolling the moot, dwarves if you feel like you really, really must, and then something to do with elves. No, I'm all about the halflings. Just buy it for the halflings. Do it.
Right, I gotta start that this weekend here in the chat. Tiger Nan was given some ideas as well for this halfling campaign, so maybe that'll be after the Southlands. I have like 3 things in the works now that we might do, so who knows?
I like Rayfrast's last comment. I'm from Cornwall. Badger Riders defo exist. I've seen him, mate. I went to Cornwall last year. I saw him there.
I'm saying I was gonna leave you for that one because I don't get the reference, but
I know where he's at. I know what he's talking about.
So if you were to like grade the book, give it some kind of rating, I say review. It doesn't have to be like I give it 9 out of 10 stars, but like how many Halfling Badger Riders would you give it?
I did actually think about this, and out of Badger, I'd give it 4 Badger Riders out of a full unit of 5, and that's pure. I only dropped 1 because of its not narrow focus, but focus on non-human species. Apart from that first chapter, which you just pretend that's not there for a minute. It's brilliant book, loads of stuff in there, definitely worth it. But it just loses that 1 Badger Rider because of its specificity towards species. Try saying that 10 times.
Yeah, right. Whew. I was thinking of being a little more generous. I was going to give it 4.5 Badger Riders out of 5, mostly because of the lack of maps for Carrick Ranger to be able to use as like potential generic dwarf Carrick maps to fit in other places, or to build a campaign around Carrick Ranger specifically. If it had that, I would probably say this is I would practically make it a must-buy. I love this book a lot. I think they did a fantastic job.
You're more generous than me. It nearly got 3, but I thought, no, come on, let's go.
But yeah, that's our take on archives. So thank you so much for joining me, Bastion.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me again.
Right, well, so Grimstream...
If anyone invites me somewhere twice, I must be doing something right.
So Grimstream Imperialist Lore is back on irregular basis. I'm not going to nail down any schedule at this point. Things are just too busy with all the other recording and everything we do, plus, my real job. But I hope to bring it back every a couple of weeks here, talking about the different books for this, or if people had requests of things to possibly cover here. I love the idea of getting different guests, so maybe I'll see if others want to throw their hat in the ring and join me talking about stuff. Otherwise, Bastion will definitely be back.
Join the Patreon so we can give his job up.
I mean, that would be fantastic. We need, a handful more patrons before that happens, but yeah. Jump on there so I can quit my job and do this full time. What was that?
I said jump on the Patreon. Let's support Dan in his dream.
So yeah, check out patreon.com/professionalcasual, where we have all kinds of extra stuff. Our regular podcast, a Grim Podcast of Perilous Adventure, the Lost Omens podcast, where we play Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and Elite 8 Showdown. You get episodes a week early at the $5 tier and above. We have NPCs and monsters coming out every other week for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay and Pathfinder 2nd Edition. At the $5 tier, you get to choose which game you want characters and things from. At the $10 tier, you get both. At the $10 tier, you also get the podcast exclusive access to Settling the Southlands, our homebrew campaign we're playing through. It is also on YouTube for free, but at half the speed. So you get exclusive podcast access there and video twice as fast. And then we've got all kinds of other stuff there as well. We've got, at the $20 tier, you get things like, what's the word I'm looking for here? You get discount codes on our shop for things like the shirt I'm wearing. We have the King Ding Doppeldonger tier, which is actually full at the moment. We have another one, which is fantastic, where people will get to play in a game with us twice a year. We'll be setting that up relatively soon for the first one of that.
Want to join me at the Lofty?
Yeah. There are two King Ding Doppeldongers, which is just...
It was getting lonely at the top.
we also have our monthly meetups on Discord where Danny and pretty much whoever else can join at the time. We'll do a video chat with whoever else wants to show up. And Danny's been doing different days of the week and times because we have people from all over the world in the Patreon. So she doesn't want to keep it the same day and time every time because then the same people would not be able to make it. You know, it might be Mr. Bowling's middle of the night over in Australia if we did the same time every time. So we try to mix that up and make it so as inclusive as we can. So check out patreon.com/professionalcasual. If you're here on the Twitch, join us on Monday nights where we play Marvel Crisis Protocol. Because we have, we're nerds with all kinds of different hats. We love miniature gaming, and that's the current hotness. And this Twitch is going to be real busy coming up the end of the month. We'll be at Adepticon from the 24th to the 27th of March. So join us there to see our coverage of Marvel Crisis Protocol at one of the biggest miniature conventions in the country. Other than that, thank you so much for joining me, Bastion. It was a great time. And we'll see everybody next time. If you are on the Patreon, throw me some messages about what do you want to see next. Which book do you want us to talk about next time? Other than that, have a great one. We'll see you later. Bye.
Ta-ta.